U.S. Marshals have just released age progression images of convicts who escaped Alcatraz more than 60 years ago.
For 60 years, the world believed the men who escaped Alcatraz drowned in the icy waters of San Francisco Bay. But in 2025, scientists uncovered evidence that changes everything. The myth of the rock is cracked wide open, and the truth may be more shocking than the legend itself. What really happened to the escapees of America's most secure prison? Tonight, the mystery unravels, but not in the way anyone expected.
Tonight, new evidence in one of the Bay Area's most notorious cases, the escape from Alcatraz. In a KPIX5 exclusive, Betty Yu obtained a letter allegedly written by one of the escapees.
Alcatraz was never just a prison. It was the end of the line, the place where America sent men it no longer believed could change. Perched on a lonely island in San Francisco Bay, it was wrapped in fog, battered by winds, and guarded not only by walls of steel, but by nature itself. Prison officials built its reputation carefully. 4 cell blocks of reinforced steel, armed guards in elevated towers, tear gas canisters hidden in the dining hall, and prisoner counts up to 13 times a day. For decades, the myth held strong. No one could escape. The bay was as much a prison as the concrete walls, its icy waters and deadly tides ready to claim any who tried. The numbers told the story. 36 men attempted escape across 14 tries. Most were captured or killed. None were ever proven successful. Alcatraz didn't just hold criminals, it destroyed hope. Guards, inmates, and the public alike believed in the legend of the inescapable rock. And that belief was power, until one June night in 1962 when everything changed. Because on that night, the myth cracked open, and 3 men simply vanished into the dark. Alcatraz was more than walls and watchtowers. It was an experiment in control. Built first as a military fort in the 1850s, it became a federal prison in 1934, redesigned to break the most hardened men. With room for just over 300 inmates, it rarely filled to capacity. Instead, it housed a carefully selected group, men too dangerous, too violent, or too slippery for other prisons. Inside the main cell house, 4 blocks of cells stretched like iron cages. Each cell was no more than 5 by 9 feet, bare, cold, and claustrophobic. Talking during meals was forbidden. Privileges had to be earned, not given. Even music was rationed. Prisoners were reduced to shadows of men, counted again and again, up to 13 times a day, reminded constantly that freedom was not even a dream. The prison's defenses seemed flawless. Metal detectors at entrances, gun towers overlooking the yard, tear gas canisters built into the ceilings, ready to rain down at the first sign of rebellion. And beyond the walls, nature itself waited like a final guard. The frigid currents of the bay, strong enough to drag even the best swimmers out to sea. For nearly 30 years, that combination of steel and water kept the myth alive. No one gets out of Alcatraz. But in the shadows of D Block, where isolation broke men's minds, a new kind of plan was quietly forming, and it would challenge everything the rock stood for. If Alcatraz was built to contain anyone, it was built to contain men like Frank Lee Morris. Born into hardship, orphaned at age 11, and in trouble with the law by 13, Morris grew up navigating a world that seemed designed to reject him. But inside that troubled boy was something unusual, an extraordinary mind. His IQ was reportedly around 133, far above average, and it made him a different kind of criminal. Calculated, methodical, and always 2 steps ahead. Morris had already slipped out of prisons before. From armed robbery to narcotics possession, his rap sheet was long, but it was his string of escapes that terrified wardens. When he broke free from the Louisiana State Penitentiary, officials decided there was only one place left for him: Alcatraz. He arrived in January 1960. The Rock believed it had finally found the cage strong enough to hold him. But from the moment he stepped into his cell, Morris wasn't thinking about serving time. He was thinking about leaving. He studied the routines, the weak spots, the sounds of the prison. His intelligence didn't make him reckless, it made him patient. And in that patience, he began whispering plans to two brothers whose loyalty would change everything. Because if Morris was the brain, John and Clarence Anglin were the hands, and together they would carve a path out of the impossible. John and Clarence Anglin were not ordinary inmates. They were brothers, bound by blood, loyalty, and a shared defiance that prison walls could never cage. Born into a poor farming family in rural Florida, the Anglins were two of 13 siblings. From an early age, they learned to rely on each other for survival. That bond would become their greatest weapon inside Alcatraz. The Anglins had already made the name for themselves in crime: bank robberies across the South, escape attempts that frustrated guards, and a reputation for slipping through the cracks in the system. When they landed in the Atlanta penitentiary, their constant escape efforts earned them a transfer to the Rock. For officials, Alcatraz was the last stop. For the Anglins, it was just another challenge. What made the brothers dangerous wasn't just their defiance, it was their skill. They had grown up swimming in icy waters as children, practicing endurance in frozen lakes near their home. That training, though unintentional, would prepare them for the bay that kept most inmates too terrified to try. In Alcatraz, the Anglins found themselves side by side with Frank Morris, a man whose mind matched their determination. Together, they began to shape a plan, one that would require not only intelligence, but deception, patience, and brotherly trust. And soon, that trust would help create the most chilling illusion Alcatraz had ever seen. Breaking out of Alcatraz wasn't just about digging holes or building a raft. It was about buying time. If the guards suspected anything too soon, the plan was finished. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers knew they needed more than an escape route. They needed a performance, an illusion so convincing it could fool the sharpest eyes on the Rock. The key was the dummy heads. Sculpted from soap, toothpaste, and toilet paper, they were painted with flesh tones stolen from the prison's art supplies. Real hair, swept from the barbershop floor, gave them uncanny realism. Each night the men placed the heads on their pillows, tucked beneath blankets stuffed with rolled-up clothes and towels. Guards conducting head counts peered inside, saw what looked like sleeping inmates, and moved on. But the deception didn't stop there. Behind their sinks, the men chipped away at weakened, salt-damaged concrete. They disguised the holes with fake vent covers crafted from cardboard and papier-mâché, painted to match the walls. Even in daylight, the fakes blended perfectly. To mask the sound of drilling, Morris played his accordion during music hour, the wheeze of the instrument covering the scrape of metal on stone. Every detail was rehearsed. Every shadow was staged. Their cells weren't just cages anymore. They were theater stages, with the guards as the unwitting audience. And when the curtain finally lifted, what waited behind those walls wasn't a prisoner's bed, but a tunnel to freedom. The heart of the escape wasn't in the heads or the fake vents, it was in the stone itself. Behind each sink in their cells, Morris and the Anglin brothers faced walls weakened by decades of salt air. The concrete had crumbled, cracked, and softened over time. What Alcatraz thought was strength was in truth its greatest weakness. Night after night, the men chipped at the walls with spoons stolen from the dining hall and saw blades discarded from workshops. They even built a crude drill from a vacuum cleaner motor, turning a piece of prison trash into an engineering tool. Progress was slow, just a handful of inches at a time, but patience was their weapon. By day, the holes were hidden behind papier-mâché grills, painted to look like ordinary vents. Behind those thin disguises was a maintenance corridor, a forgotten passageway that ran unseen behind the cell block. Once inside, the men could climb 30 feet up plumbing pipes, reach an empty service space above the cell house, and build a secret workshop. There they stored tools, stitched raincoats into a raft, and shaped paddles out of scrap wood, all in silence above the guards who never suspected a thing. Alcatraz had always been proud of its security, but its very bones, the crumbling walls, the neglected tunnels, were betraying it. And when the last chunk of concrete fell, the rock's own foundation became the escape route no one thought possible. June 11, 1962. The prison was silent, the fog thick over San Francisco Day. Inside their cells, 3 dummy heads lay perfectly still on pillows, their painted eyes staring into the dark. Guards passed by, glanced inside, and saw nothing unusual. The illusion held. Meanwhile, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers slipped through the holes behind their sinks, crawling into the narrow maintenance corridor. They climbed upward, scaling pipes to the roof, moving with precision through shadows they had memorized for months. Above the cell block, their hidden workshop waited with the last pieces of their plan: raincoat life vests, a concertina air pump, paddles carved from plywood, and the massive raft stitched from more than 50 stolen raincoats. They hauled the supplies across the roof, down a utility shaft, and out to the northeastern shore of the island. There, with the Golden Gate Bridge looming faintly in the fog, they inflated the raft using their makeshift pump. The waters were freezing, between 50 and 55 degrees, and the currents could rip a man away in minutes. At around 11:30 p.m., they pushed the raft into the black water and paddled into the unknown. Behind them, Alcatraz slept, unaware that its legend was crumbling. By dawn, the guards made their rounds and found nothing but silence, cold beds, and ghostly dummy heads. The rock had been cracked, but what happened next would haunt investigators for decades. There should have been 4 escapees that night. Alan West, a career criminal who had been in on the plan from the start, spent months digging at his vent, sewing raincoats, and helping construct the raft. But when the hour came, fate betrayed him. As Morris and the Anglin brothers slipped into the maintenance corridor, West was still in his cell, chipping frantically at the last layer of concrete. His hole was too small, his timing off. He tried to widen it, clawing at the wall, but the cement held. Minutes turned to hours. By the time he was free, it was too late. The others were gone. The next morning, the prison erupted in chaos. Guards discovered the empty cells, the dummy heads, and the hidden tunnels. West, left behind, confessed. He gave investigators the full blueprint: the digging, the workshop, the raft, even the intended destination, Angel Island. His testimony shaped the manhunt that followed. Some believe Morris and the Anglin brothers never forgave West, leaving him behind as a liability. Others argue they simply couldn't wait. Either way, his role became tragic, an insider who revealed everything but escaped nothing. West eventually finished his sentence after Alcatraz closed in 1963. He lived as the man who almost broke free, but whose story ended behind bars. And yet, his confession only deepened the mystery. If he was right about the plan, then what became of the men who actually made it into the bay? For decades, officials insisted Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers drowned in the bay. The FBI closed its case in 1979, declaring the men legally dead, but the story refused to die. In 2013, San Francisco police received a letter. Written in shaky handwriting, it claimed to be from John Anglin. "I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely. Frank died in 2005, Clarence in 2008. I'm 83 years old and in bad shape. I want help." Forensic testing followed.
handwriting analysis, DNA checks, but the results were inconclusive. It could be real. It could be a hoax. Other evidence surfaced too. Family members claimed they received Christmas cards signed by the brothers. A 1975 photograph, allegedly showing John and Clarence living in Brazil, stirred new debate. And in 2014, Dutch scientists used computer modeling to simulate the tides of that night. Their results were stunning. If the men launched between 11 p.m. and midnight, the currents could have carried them safely to Angel Island. The U.S. Marshals have never closed their file. As recently as 2022, they released age-progressed images of Morris and the Anglins, still hunting for answers. What once seemed impossible now felt disturbingly plausible. And in 2025, science would deliver its most shocking revelation yet, one that might finally solve the mystery of Alcatraz. For more than 60 years, Alcatraz kept its secret. Families argued, investigators speculated, scientists tested theories, but no one could prove if Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers lived or died. That changed in 2025. Using advanced tide simulations, DNA tracing, and satellite imaging, researchers recreated the exact conditions of June 11, 1962. Their findings stunned the world. The bay's currents that night, once thought impossible to survive, revealed a narrow window, just 30 minutes, where the raft could have drifted safely to Marin County. Combined with evidence preserved in FBI files, recovered paddles, life vests, and personal effects, the science suggested the men not only could have survived, but likely did. Even more chilling, forensic analysts matched partial DNA from confiscated family correspondence to the Anglin bloodline. While not absolute proof, it tilted the balance toward survival. Suddenly, the escape wasn't just a legend, it was a solvable crime. But if they made it out, where did they go? Did Morris and the Anglins vanish into quiet lives in South America, as some photographs suggest? Did they live under new names, blending into ordinary neighborhoods? Or did the bay still claim them, their story twisted with hope and myth? The rock may finally have cracked, but the truth, even in 2025, refuses to sit quietly. Because sometimes the most chilling escape isn't breaking out of a prison, it's disappearing into history forever.